All right. Welcome to the first official online free class for modern American shamanism for 2021 for all of us folks that are stuck at home because of the COVID pandemic. This class will be the heathen and pagan practices outlawed by the Catholic Church. It's kind of interesting. Some of the things people probably already know, but some of the other laws shine light on things that are not really big. We don't catch them in the sagas or the Eddas, and so actually it's for the laws that we know they exist. So I'll try and break those down. And another interesting thing to know, you'd never see this coming from the Catholic Church, but a lot of times when men broke the laws, their harshest punishment was to be whipped, and it went down to paying monetary fines. Women 9 times out of 10 were just executed. I don't know, that doesn't sound like a fair legal system to me, but I'm not Catholic. Let's start with the fact that a lot of these laws are going to come from, and I have to read this because I can't pronounce Latin, Codex Theodosianus. I will put it in uh, the comment section under this video because I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly. So let's start off with the fact that one of the first laws the church passed was putting an end to um, reading signs in the stars, reading signs by animal noises and patterns, reading signs by runes or tarot cards or things like that. They put an absolute end to that. They wanted a complete monopoly on being able to see the future. And in fact, it basically says anybody caught seeing the future that's not a Catholic priest was to be executed. This is one of the things where everybody was just instantly executed if you were caught. So this is one of the more fair laws, I guess. It specifically talks about runes and cards, but it goes into the fact about the horses. And we know from Tacitus Germanus that the Germans had a specific type of priest caste that took care of white horses that were kept in a grove, a sacred grove, and they would watch these horses and see how they interacted with each other, the noises they made, and the patterns they formed when they ran around the corral and stuff. And then it was their responsibility to translate these signs from the gods and then pass them on to the rest of the people in the tribes that they were responsible for doing the religious practices of. Um, Now, one of the important things is they banned um, astrology and astronomy, all under that same law. Now, they did that to, it's more important than it sounds because most pagans and heathens lived on a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar. Um, you can say, let's do something 3 days from now, and the sun goes up and comes down 3 times. It's time to do something. But how do I plan stuff 6 months from now? You might get so busy doing your stuff that you miss a day or two, maybe even a week in 6 months. And so you're either early, late, just forgot about it altogether. But with the moon, it's a specific new moon, phases of the moon, and a full moon. And so based on what phase the moon is or how many phases it's gone through when you want to plan something. And it's also intermixed with the seasons and the types of moons. Each moon, even in the Northern European traditions, had names like the fox moon and the trout moon and things like that. It just wasn't the Native Americans. So, but oddly enough, I found that a lot of people don't know this that the lunar cycle goes from new moon to new moon, not full moon to full moon. So, the beginning of each lunar cycle is the new moon. And so, you'd use this lunar calendar to predict celebrations and ritual times and basic get togethers because it was their calendar. And you the holidays, planning the holidays and the celebrations and everything. And also, an important note is that a day for Germans and most Germanic tribes starts at sundown. So, like, today is the second. I'm filming this at uh, 5 o'clock. The sun hasn't set here yet. So, this is still the second. But as soon as the sun goes down, it's the third. So once the sun goes down, the moon pops up. It is five, or not five, but 3, 3, 21. Okay, we don't wait for the sun to come up in the morning. As soon as the sun sets today and the moon comes up, it's the new day. So just like it goes from new moon to new moon, it's from sundown to sundown, or moonrise to moonrise, however you want to look at it. And that's how they did their days. I am going to look at my paper a lot because there are a lot of laws that the Catholic Church saw deemed to pass to kind of slow down heathenism and pagan practices. So I didn't bother to memorize them all. Um, the knowledge of those who are equipped with magical arts and who are discovered to plot against men's lives or have perverted modest minds. Basically, this one is strictly aimed at women. So any women doing anything, midwife, healing a sick family member with herbs, uh, got lucky and won the lottery, wanted to look nice for something and spend a little extra time doing makeup and hair and a nice dress, and some guy thought she was a little too sexy, sorry, you're out of there, you're dead. They could actually kill you for any of those things because this a lot of their laws are really vague. Some of them are aimed at specific practices, and the others are so vague. It's amazing that anybody's still alive. Um, Oh, and this law specifically goes to state that this is only for magical practices that aren't deemed by their god. So, um, if you're caught doing magic, pagan magic, you're dead. But if you're doing Catholic magic, you're all clear and good. Um, there actually was a problem with, in the beginning, the formation of the Catholic Church with Catholic priests, I don't know, being normal people and sharing religions. You know, they would go to a heathen bloat and, you know, and then maybe go to a Southern European pagan ritual and they'd all participate. And these people, these heathens and pagans, were also free to come and sit in on Catholic Mass and everything. Well, the church thought that gave people options, and so that was a no-go. And so they outlawed that. So any priests that were caught going to either heathen or pagan practices was fined and if, heavy fees and extra work. And if it went too much and went too far, and they caught you more than once, you could be stripped of your priestly license or whatever they call it. So that was actually a thing. Now, here we come to sacrifices. This lets us know some of the major things that they sacrificed. We know that the Northern Europeans, the heathens, sacrificed a lot of horses and boars. It seems that all except for Freyr and Freya, who their big sacrifices were boars. I guess because that's what they rode. And well, Freya also had a chariot pulled by her cats. But when you did sacrifices, you sacrificed boars. You never sacrificed a cat. Not if you actually wanted something positive from Freya. There was a sacrificing of horses. A lot of they would always sacrifice the horse, and then they would eat the horse. I've got this question before. Do you eat your sacrifice? I mean, like if it's edible, if it's a mammal. Um, and the answer is yes. Nobody wasted anything. It's not the animal itself that you're sacrificing to the gods. It's it's their Megan, their life force, and their blood, which would they considered their Megan being in the blood, and that's why you made the blood sacrifice and then cooked and ate the animal. And when I originally wrote this class, I got curious, and so I spent several days digging through federal and state laws, and I was surprised that there is no law against eating horse meat. A lot of people, me included, thought that there was some huge federal law against eating horse meat. I never questioned it, but there isn't one. There is no state in the 50 states and no federal law against eating horse meat. That is just a Christian dictation that has come down through the centuries that we have perceived that there must be some hidden federal law somewhere that will cost, 20 years in prison for eating a horse steak, but there's not. It's just Christian dictates that have convinced people that it's completely illegal to eat horses, and that's because horses were so important to the Germanic people and one of the number one things that they sacrificed to their gods. And so that's why we are all led to believe that it's illegal to kill and eat horses. Um, and because they, like we talked about before, it was the big thing to predict the future and the gods' wills by watching horses run around and, I don't know, eat hay. Um, A lot of animals also were sacrificed by the vulva and the vitki and other magical practitioners. And actually, a great long list of magical practitioners that we'll get into another class. There wasn't just the vulva and the vitki. There's like 15, 20 different types of magical practitioners in the Germanic and heathen practices. So, but like I said, we'll talk about that later. Almost went on a tangent. Um, but they would sacrifice it, and the reason they would do that is they would sacrifice the animal and ride the animal's soul into the underworld. That's how the magical practitioner journeyed to the underworld. That, so far as I can tell, is a forgotten practice. So don't try and sacrifice a random animal and ride its soul to the underworld, because we don't know how to do that anymore. There's a very good story about Otar and the goddess Freya and the sacrificing of a boar. You should really look into that. Just Google Freya and Otar, Ottar, and that is a beautiful story. It adds to the story of Ragnarok that most people don't know. Uh, there's more humans that survive Ragnarok than the two humans that are hiding in the forest, and a lot more gods and goddesses survive Ragnarok than we're led to believe too. Just saying, read your stories. Um, Another thing, it goes on to talk about making sacrifices to your ancestors. Northern Europeans were huge ancestor worshippers. They kind of made the Chinese look like beginners. Um, in fact, today we're kind of led to believe that it's that they worship the gods like every day and went to bloat like every day. But that's a Christian carryover. That's people still holding on to their Christian faiths when they transfer to heathens, except for certain holidays and certain bloats. 9 times out of 10, heathen practitioners pre Christian time worshiped their ancestors, and they made sacrifices and bloats and symbols to their ancestors, not the gods. The reason for that was sometimes you couldn't always rely on the gods. Like, look at the story between Odin and Freya when there's that bet over which humans are going to do what, and Odin always tries to tip the scales and everything. Not saying that that's what always happened. I'm just saying they don't always have your personal interest in stakes, when things like that happen. But your ancestors, they always have a personal uh, I don't know, iron in the fire, to because it's about keeping you and your family line and their family line going on and on and on, and becoming, well-to-do and healthy and a strong family line. So they've always got something, a reason for helping you correctly, I guess is a way to say. Plus, you're transferring Megan to them, and they can transfer Megan to you, and you get that knowledge exchange back and forth. And there's another story. There's a reason, because we're going to get into a lot of stories and talk about them, where a young boy whose mother was a vulva and she passed away, and he goes and does an utasete and sits on her grave mound, and she comes out of the grave mound and casts spells on him so that the evil Christians can't catch him and execute him, because he's trying to travel somewhere and everything. We'll get into that story later. So, so we did the eating of horse meat. Oh, we know that the Northern Europeans made images of the gods out of wood poles, and yeah, you got it. The Catholic Church made very specific laws against making figurines out of gods out of wood poles, and also out of stone. In the Southern Europe, they did a lot of stone masonry, so they made a lot of their images out of stone. But there's also just huge law against making pictures of your gods and worshiping them, or even just having them. Now, these wooden posts and figurines of the gods and goddesses, they had, some of them were kept in, like the story of Bremen, who visited Uppsala and talked about the three god poles, Freyr, Thor, and Odin, that everybody worshipped and hang things off of, and sacrificed horses to, and some, other stuff. But now the god poles were also specifically Freyr and Nerthus, or Jord, whichever, the same goddess, just different regions for the name, were carried around on carts to different villages in kind of a procession, and everybody would make sacrifices and do their rituals, and ask for fertility and blessings and everything, because Freyr is the god of fertility. They don't have a goddess of fertility. The Northern Europeans have a god of fertility. So talk about that later too. But now, very important, the Northern Europeans were major worshippers of the earth. They actually believed they don't do a casting of a circle and sanctifying the ground and everything when they do a ritual because I'm going to do this. I'm going to go on a tangent. They saw Nerthus as already sacred and pure. So you didn't have to cast a protective circle because Nerthus was already there protecting you. You didn't need to make the ground sacred because Nerthus was already sacred. So like, who are you to try and make the earth even more sacred than it already is? And they worshipped her and valued her so much on Nerthus Day once a year when the cart was coming through the different villages. If you got caught with a knife or a sword or anything out, um, it was a death sentence. The pagans and the heathens would execute you because you're being disrespectful to the earth goddess, having a weapon out on her holy day. There were no fights, no conflicts, no disagreements, and don't be caught with a weapon because they valued her so much and they did not want to interfere with her, that they were just nothing. It was instant death sentence if you're caught with a weapon on Earth's Day, especially when the cart with the goddess statue was being rolled through the village. Um, ah, in Iceland and all the other European countries too, it started off with this thing where you all have to be Catholic, but you can be heathen at home. So as long as you say your Hail Marys and through the week and go to the church on Sunday and give the church your hard-earned money, you all can be pagans and heathens when you're at home. That lasted for like a generation, and then they made it illegal. The law specifically states it is illegal to read, discuss any heathen philosophy or religion, even in your own home. So they get very specific. You can't read books. You can't discuss, the Havamal and why you it shouldn't drink too much, because all that's a heathen philosophy. Oh, and they go on to repeat again that it's illegal to sacrifice to those pagan images that they created. Now, we know that that people wore Thor's hammers, but there also used to be pendants of the goddesses, which I haven't seen any in archaeology, but there must have been people who wore pendants to different goddesses because the Catholic Church, guess what, made a law preventing it. Um, Though we found a number of Thor's hammers, or not we particularly, but archaeologists have found a number of Thor's hammers in several grave sites and other digs. And so we know that they wore the Thor's hammer and we know what they look like. That's how we know how to make them or remake them today. But I find it interesting that there are goddess symbols that you can't find any of. So it kind of makes you wonder if there was some kind of massive culling where they went around and ransacked people's homes and just executed people or women in particular because men didn't usually run around with necklaces for the goddess that I've found out. And so they just executed women until it became a thing that you just didn't do it anymore because you valued your life or something. But we know that there was a pendant to the different goddesses, but we just don't know what they were. The Catholic Church is pretty good at executing people all day long to get what they want. We did talk about ancestors being more important than the gods, and they were worshipped more. There's a specific law, the Theodores Penitential law, written in the 7th century. I will type that in the comments, don't worry. Specifically talks about that. Specifically talks about the burning of offerings and breaking offerings before you put them in the fire to release the Megan. And that's why you find a lot of bent swords and broken spears and busted statues that are offered in these bogs and other places, because it's not the thing itself. The gods have no use for a sword. They have no use for a living horse. They have no use for a spear or a statue to themselves or anybody else. It's the energy you put into making those or raising those, that you are breaking the object or killing the horse, and you're releasing that energy you put into it to that Megan, and you're giving that to the gods. It's not the object itself. It's the breaking that object and releasing the energy you put into it, and that's your sacrifice to the gods. You notice the Catholic Church doesn't do that. So if they caught you breaking something and tossing it into a river or a bog, that was a death sentence because you were evidently working, giving sacrifices to the ancient gods. Now, these are Anglo-Saxon laws that we're getting into now. Now we see a lot of execution of women. Women who are accustomed to harbor enchanters. They specifically state Galder people, craft something or another. I apologize, I can't pronounce that word. They even say wizards and witches. So if you practice Galder and you lived at home with your wife, she could be murdered for harboring a magical practitioner. So there actually was an issue with this that they had to make another law. It's like, what is that? The Catholic Church's favorite game called Let's Make a Law. And so if you, again, if you did anything, if your mother was a healer with herbs or a midwife or whatever, if your third cousin stopped by the house and spent the night and did that, hey, you want to play a game of Ouija board or you want me to mark on some bones and throw them on the table. Let's play a game. This is who you're going to marry. Boom, the wife was executed. Screw the guy that did it. The woman of the house was executed because of that. They were not allowed to be anywhere near that. That's one of the ways that they bred it out of children, was simply executing the women. That way, the women were so afraid of this stuff that they made their kids afraid of it, and boom, one and two generations, you've bred out the concept of heathenry and the desire to practice it because you're taught as a child how evil and destructive it is. Pretty slick, though. I got to give the Catholic Church that. Uh, Now, we're talking about this thing that in the heathen tradition, the women were always in charge of the home. We've got a whole class on women practices and their place in Northern European pre-Christian religions. And one of the things we talk about is that they're given the keys at the wedding to symbolize that she becomes in charge of the man's home and property because 9 out of 10 times she's running everything while the man's off doing, war or raiding or whatever it is. She's responsible for making trades and exchanges and selling things for money that they can do other things with. And so she was actually like the accountant and the salesperson and the manager of the house and farm, the whole 9 yards, which is one of the reasons that the Catholic Church came in and reversed those roles. You're not good for anything but uh, they said, except for like breeding and raising children and cooking food and mending shirts. So they took the women's role out of the heathen practice and just destroyed it and reduced their whole role to subservience, which is not in the heathen tradition at all. So I mean that's actually very alien to our practices and our ancestors. Um, Here we go. One under the law of King Edgar in the 10th century, one of the laws he passed, uh, teach every priest to extinguish heathendom and forbid the worshiping fountains. So, excuse me, everybody. So we know at certain places throughout Northern Europe and Southern Europe, they actually worshiped fountains. Um, where running water is coming straight out of the ground, where the water is the purest and the clearest and everything. So we know that our ancestors worshipped fountains, and there are several places still today that are kept up and are tourist attractions now, where heathen practices and certain religious practices were done at fountains. In fact, the Pennsylvania German people came over here and made some fountains and aquifers and things sacred sites, and they still practice and do certain worships practices at those today here in America. Another one, uh, incantations of the dead, trying to bring the dead back to life or talking with the dead. Major no-go. Catholic Church didn't like that, and we're in the 10th century now, so this was going for 1,000 years after the Catholic Church supposedly took everything over. Again, the omens, if you were to say that, there's a murder of crows, oh, is that an omen? Oh, you're dead. Um, Doing Galder, singing specific types of incantations. Galder is not chanting the rune's name. Galder is a specific runic, or not runic, but a poetic meter, which we'll get into. But I'm no good at it, but it's a poetic meter, so you can practice it and develop it. You just have to know what's what. Um, oh, worshiping in a grove of trees. That's heathen. Dirt worshiping tree huggers. That makes you a heathen, and that means if you're a man, you get fined and beat, and it makes you a woman, you just get hanged or set on fire. Um, sorry, just about trying to run. Boy, this was not a 10-minute class. I'm sorry, and I'm flying through this, leaving a lot of stuff out. Okay, the last thing we're going to cover from here. This is a specific thing that you had to, a specific promise that you had to make. You had to go through this list of things saying, I have not done this. It's from the 16th canon law enacted under King Edgar in the 10th century. So when priests was being promoted to bishop, they had to make an oath stating the following: that they had never learned the art of poetry by the water source. So again, a water source is the where the water's coming out of the ground, a fountain, and so a natural spring. So we know here that they sat by these sacred springs and learned the art of poetry. Okay, that's one of the things we know. They've never sung Galder and never sat beneath a hanged man. So we know, again, we know what Galder is. And if you know what it means to sit underneath a hanged man, this is not some body that's been hanging off a tree for like a week. What they would do is the magical practitioners that wanted to go to the underworld, like we talked about riding the animal soul into the underworld. As soon as the person's hanged and that person has died, the magical practitioner would sit under or near the hanged person, and they would ride that person's soul into the underworld. So that's one of the things. It's not sitting under a hanged man; it's being near or under a recently hanged man that you watched hang, and then riding his soul into the underworld. So those are some of the things that we have learned about with the horses and the different things and sitting under a hanged man. It's the whole concept of the crossroads. Crossroads is not a four-way intersection. We'll talk about that later. So, but anyway, it's the idea of a lot of these things are past, and I haven't even really gone through a lot of these because this is a 3-hour class. Um, but it gives you an idea of some of the practices that we need to look into and some of the things that we can study more and to get into these heathen practices that people were made afraid of and were made to fear for hundreds of years because the Catholic Church didn't like it. They saw it as competition. So I hope you found this interesting and insightful. And barring any more immediate work I have to do around the house, we're going to have another one of these classes next week. And I will let you know what that's going to be by the end of the week. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be Crow Spirit, and she's going to be talking about the Nurthus project and how to prep certain things to grow in the garden and how to do your soil so you can get your seedlings started inside if you have that ability. And get your garden started before it's warm enough to do it outside. Thank you, and hope you enjoyed the class. See you later.